for Vietnam. They got in, but then they just never really decided what was sufficient to leave.
That's why they call it Mondays
Bye bye.
with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So, events in Iran have once again brought us, during a podcast, to possibly talking about things that we don't really have the reporting basis yet to see what exactly is going on. So, I don't know if we should mention it, but what do you think?
Obviously, it's an ongoing development. So this isn't the first time that they've actually attacked us. Because remember, they fired those. Gosh, what? It was a few. I don't know if it was a few months ago or a few weeks ago. They retaliated when the U.S. blew up the nuclear facilities. They attacked that base with, was it missiles? This is an ongoing thing. So it may seem like a new development, but it's just a back and forth thing because we've been hitting Iran with weapons even while Biden was president when they fired all those drones and missiles at Israel. And we shot down like what, 99% or something like that of all the. So this is an ongoing thing, but it's definitely escalated, right? So the two carrier groups in the Gulf is a big deal. That's a huge amount of resources.
Yeah.
There's no comparison anywhere in the world right now of that accumulation of resources, other than maybe on the front between Russia and Ukraine. There's a whole lot of troops there. Right now in the world, there's hotspots of military activity. This is now one of them, right? What's going on between Iran and the US is escalation. And then the other one is actually Cuba, where Trump was murmuring about maybe invading Cuba. It's okay. That would only make us be fighting on two fronts.
Yeah, one of those fronts would be pretty close to Florida, pretty close to Mar-a-Lago.
A stone's throw in the grand scheme of things, not far away at all.
So we agree it's more or less an escalation of hostilities or suspended hostilities or suspended and restarted hostilities. I remember that in June when did we actually do the bunker buster bombs? Yeah, we did. Yeah, and those were alluded to during the Iraq War, but I don't know if they were used at the time. And then we used them, then it looked like, oh, this is going to spiral into something big, or I don't know, it might have looked that way to me or others, but then it isn't. It's one more of the many conflicts going on around the world. Strange to think about, is my perspective on it.
This is one of those things where this is actually a conflict if you pay close attention to the news. I do. I read the news pretty much every day, the newspaper. I pay attention to news reports and media, and etc. This is actually, there's a hidden war that's been going on between Israel and Iran that the U.S. helps every so often. That's been going on for years and years. This isn't the first time that Iran's been attacked. This is the first time that Iran's heavily escalating its response, right? Because its responses in the past have been fairly not tame in comparison, but they've been measured. It's been more of this is a one-time kind of thing. We have to respond to show we have the power to respond to signal deterrence that the capability is there. But then they would utilize diplomatic back channels and all that other stuff to signal there's not actually going to be a fight. But what's different about this situation is that Trump's the one who started the saber rattling when Iran started attacking its protesters and shooting them in the streets. That was a new level of authoritarian display of power on the part of the Iranian leadership. Trump then sent a pretty robust message: stop doing that, or there will be fighting. And we're at the fighting stage. That's where we're at. The concern I have is whether technically there is a power for like limited engagement. We've talked about this for the War Powers Act that we could technically fight with Iran for, I think it's 30 days or something, for almost, because it's self-defense, right? If we're getting attacked, the president has the authority to use military force to defend our soldiers and assets and bases, and we're getting attacked. A bunch of bases just got attacked. But if it escalates to a war, I really hope that Congress actually has that debate and establishes some kind of actual foreign policy objective or goal for what exactly we want to accomplish with Iran? Do we want a change of leadership? Do we want them to commit to a new kind of nuclear deal, but just call it the Trump nuclear deal? Because remember, Trump got rid of the old deal. It's political theater, but it's led to this consequence, which was that part of the reason this whole situation escalated is that the existing nuclear resources were used as a pretext, right? That the efforts by Iran to do whatever it is they're doing was then used as justification, similar to what happened in Iraq, actually, with Bush's argument about weapons of mass destruction. It's like there were opportunities. I'm seeing parallels, really, of ginning up a war. There were plenty of opportunities to establish beyond a reasonable doubt in Iraq and with Iran that their nuclear program was, they put the kibosh on it or they stopped it. Or the weapons program in Iraq, same kind of deal. There, if you remember, there was the UN special investigator. He went in and looked at it and filed a report, and it just vanished into the mists of times. But it was essentially like nothing to see. There's nothing here. This is just a war. Anyways, that's the past, but the past echoes into the present because what we're going to see here is either we go into a huge war with a country of 90 million people, or it de-escalates into something else. I'm not sure. My one concern is what I see different from this president compared to past presidents is that he lacks a certain degree of subtlety in the actions that he does on the world stage, that it's always in your face. So they're like, let's stop the drug trade. Okay, how do you stop the drug trade? Blow up a bunch of boats. It's no, the reason that people engage in the drug trade is money. And so people are replaceable, but the demand is what drives it. What's going to happen is that eventually, if they can't have people doing the boats, they're going to become innovative, like drones and robots and AI. I guess my point is that sometimes the responses seem too facile, too simple on their face, that there's no nuance here in the sort of long term game. It actually, I know this is going to sound a little silly, but it reminds me a lot of the US economy, that on the quarter by quarter system where you have to drive up profits on a quarterly basis, but you don't make the long term investments to ensure stability or viability of your company, your product, your business.
Yeah, 4 little sprints each quarter per year. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what happens is you get bizarre situations where companies latch on to the new trend or fashion or technology, and you're seeing that with AI right now, where they're replacing just huge amounts of their workers with AI. Wait a second, aren't you putting all your eggs in the AI basket without actually fully testing if they can deliver the same quality product consistently? Because remember, we're seeing issues with AI where the AI hallucinates, it
Yeah.
makes stuff up, it'll lie. There was that one experiment they did where the AI tried to blackmail the researcher into not turning it off by coming up with all sorts of things to blackmail them. It was like, oh, what's going on there? But anyways, the point is, I'm really concerned that a similar kind of situation is happening here. I watched a movie on HBO about the lead up to the Vietnam War in the Johnson administration, where he kept grappling with how much he had to keep escalating the wars. Do I bomb a school? Do I bomb a church? Do I bomb a bridge? Do I bomb a hospital? Do I bomb a run? Like, how much bombing is enough bombing? And they had to just keep going over these deliberations of just ratcheting it up until it reached a point where they dropped more bombs in Vietnam than the entirety of all bombs dropped during World War II. The numbers got really crazy. If you look at the sheer volume explosive ordnance that was dropped on people and things in Vietnam, and I think it was Laos. What was the one that Anthony Bourdain pressured Obama into putting the? I think it was Laos.
It was either Laos or Cambodia, one of the two.
But it was the one where Bourdain had his episode with Obama on, and he convinced Obama to commit money to a mine sweeping initiative to essentially remove the mines so people wouldn't walk into the jungle and have their problems happen. But that was a result of U.S. foreign policy, that a huge number of bombs were dropped on a country we weren't technically at war with. And that was in part because they didn't have an exit plan for Vietnam. They got in, but then they just never really decided what was sufficient to leave. And so that's the concern I have here is that if we get into war with Iran, which it's looking like we are either at war or going to get into a war with Iran, it looks an awful lot like that. That's what the signs seem to indicate. What's next? Are we just going to get into a forever war again? I get that war is good for business. Halliburton, the oil companies, the weapons manufacturers, they fed at that particular trough for a very long time. They made an exorbitant amount of money. If that's what politics is in the United States, that Republicans start wars in the Middle East, it's just going to keep going back and forth for the next however many decades until the American electorate decides maybe we need to actually elect people who won't start huge wars without any real exit plan. I'll say this much for the Venezuela operation, it was pretty clean, right? They did it. They got Maduro out. To Trump's credit, I will say that. Like, I thought it was going to get pretty bad, but I think they developed a strategy as a lesson actually from the Iraq War that if you keep all the other people in place who were second in line for the riches and the power, and they still maintain their grip on power, that you don't lead to that kind of anarchy and sectarian division that happened in Iraq, where it broke up into different factions that were all struggling to scratch out their own little corner of the pie. That all the people who are still invested in the strength and viability of the Venezuelan economy and stability, they're all still there. They're all still engaging in their, I wouldn't call it democratic practices. Like, they don't really practice democratic values so much as like strict authoritarian stranglehold on power. But to Trump's credit, right, they, at least in that regard, they got Maduro's on trial, and it's back to business as usual. It is a little strange. I don't see that happening in Iran. So the reason I don't see that happening in Iran is they have an absolute religious power structure. And the issue you run into with government run by dogmatic ideologues is that they'll do extreme things, like what you saw in the war between Iraq and Iran, where they sent waves of children. Iran sent waves of children against Iraq. So Iraq had tanks and missiles and guns, and Iran sent waves of people. Like, that was a pretty brutal war if you look at the fighting there and the history of that. But if that's what it's going to look like I guess the one difference would be that we're going to probably have a way better technology now, like robots and drones, and that kind of tactic may not work because there won't be conventional warfare. I'm not so sure that we'll have troops fighting on the ground so much and like a mano a mano. Anyways, this is all developing. We should probably leave this for another.
Yeah, I think that the impulse that we had during the emerging Venezuela operations to get Maduro are based in caution and are based in the knowledge, hard won and thus it should be dearly guarded, that conflict can spiral out of control, and that's a terrible thing. You look at Iran in particular, and a figure I've heard is that they ended up killing thousands of their protesters.
Because the numbers are hard to get a read on because they shut down the internet, and it's always tough anytime something like that happens in a country because it becomes like a closed off system. You don't know unless someone manages to escape or defect out. It's tricky. But yes.
Yeah, it is a lot. And so you get these dilemmas where Trump is the enemy of decorum. Let's just be very clear about that, and maybe the enemy of other things as well. But so far, in terms of his military strikes, he has chosen his opponents wisely in terms of they're worse. We'll get the evidence and we'll talk about it once we have the evidence. Now, if it was Greenland, they're not hurting anybody. It's like saber rattling. It may work for you, and in this case bombing too, may work for you in one circumstance, but it always depends on the opponent. The world looks at it and is the mullahs. Yeah, they're not great. They've done some stuff over the years. But still we have trepidation at the worry of war. So, we'll see.
I guess the last thing I'll say for Iran is that there's an ongoing story that's been happening for the past few years in terms of the struggle right now against nuclear proliferation. the main argument for the existence of something like the UN and the existence of something like the UN Security Council is that it's meant to temper, it's meant to limit the ability of countries to engage in the kind of warfare that we saw during World War II, the kind of all versus all, Hobbesians bombing the heck out of major cities on multiple continents at the same time, fighting giant multi-front wars with thousands and thousands of soldiers and ships and bombs and troops and planes and everything. That part of the reason we have the development of international law and international order, why we have things like NATO and the UN, is to stop that, is to stop huge, massive conventional war. And right now, it's looking like the only deterrence from stopping aggression from powers that have nuclear weapons is countries that have their own nuclear weapons. So North Korea and Pakistan and India and a couple of other countries, China, like they have nukes. And so the impulse from the countries that are currently engaged in warlike activities around the world, the United States and Russia, is to not actively engage in any kind of real military conflict with the countries that have nukes. And the countries that either had nukes or were trying to get nukes. So had nukes was Ukraine, and trying to get nukes was Iran. They're engaged in military conflict now. And at both points in their prior to this in their history, they were given assurances from the countries with the nukes, hey, this isn't going to happen. So for Ukraine, they were given assurance by a whole bunch of countries, Russia, the United States, a bunch of others, when they divested themselves of the nuclear stockpile left over from the Soviet Union. All these countries showed up to Ukraine and said, hey, Ukraine, give up your nukes, and we promise, we assure you, we're not going to fight you. We're going to protect you. We'll be there for you. We've got your back. That didn't happen. We see what's happening now with Russia gobbling up various parts of Ukraine. They took Crimea. They took, I don't know how much percent right now of the territory of Ukraine. And that war is ongoing years and years. And then Iran has this comprehensive agreement with the Obama administration where they get a huge multilateral agreement with a whole lot of countries with a very extreme, I'm trying to think of the word, oversight, regulatory things. Like I think it was daily updates and reports, and they could go and investigate pretty much anywhere they needed to audit the activity. Like it was a very robust deal hammered out by the Obama administration with some deft diplomacy, right? Some very good effective diplomacy on the part of the stakeholders who made it happen. And Iran backed down, right? They had this agreement. They limited what they were doing. The world moved on. And then Trump comes into office, throws that agreement into the toilet because it was Obama's agreement. And here we are, right? So the message being signaled to these countries around the world is that the only protection they seem to have, period, is to have a nuclear weapon. If they don't have one, they're going to get stomped on. And little bits and pieces are going to get nibbled on and taken away from their countries, if not outright chunks, just eaten away, right? Just snatch and grab. And the countries that ostensibly are supposed to be putting a limit on that, putting a real damper on that, are permanent veto members of the UN Security Council, the body expressly put into place to stop this from happening. Aggression, unchecked, blatant aggression. Here we are, that we are in a very serious situation because Iran's got a lot of people. It's got 90 million people or something like that. It's not a pushover. I'm not going to say like Venezuela, but it's not as vulnerable as Venezuela was. It's got the ability to fight longer and in more creative ways because Venezuela was weakened by the sanctions and the death of Chavez and all the internal fighting that happened after that, because Chavez was the rock, the pillar of the Chavista movement. And in his absence, it became a real fight between the remaining factions over who got to actually take control of the country. And we saw how that played out, that it became flagrantly corrupt. Their economy plummeted. Inflation at one point was just very extreme in Venezuela. It looked really bad. Millions of refugees. Like Venezuela, I think part of the reason they caved so fast is that their economy was very weak. Their military wasn't. It says something that they needed to have Cuban forces to protect Maduro instead of having their own troops protecting Maduro. It says something more than almost anything else in terms of their actual power. Because there's the facade, they project strength versus the actual strength. But Iran is different, right? They've demonstrated a capability to have very strong missiles, very strong bombs, and a willingness to use their people fighting in a very extreme way. They're a little bit different. They don't have really a big navy, right? So
Yeah.
they're going to get starved out unless Russia intervenes. I don't think Russia will because Russia's busy with Ukraine.
Yeah.
So they're a bit isolated in the world. So in that respect, I think the U.S. in a war of attrition will eventually win, right? Because we can blockade virtually all food going in by sea or imported over land, and we can close off their airspace, right? They don't have a huge air force that can stop us. But the reason that this could lead to something like World War III is that some countries rely on Iran for economic reasons to inject capital into their economies. They also rely on Iran for a variety of other resources. Last I checked, part of the reason World War II escalated to the degree it was a fight over resources. So if you cut off the spigot of resources in the economy for countries that have a lot of military but don't have a lot of access to resources, the countries then view the military as their option to get out of that particular dilemma. All I have to say is this just made the little clock of the seconds to midnight for the nuclear clock of when we're gonna have
Yes, the Atomic Scientist Bulletin.
that one. It moved a little bit. I'm guessing it's gonna move a little bit closer to midnight because the writing is on the wall for any country that is big enough to get on the radar of these bigger countries that have nukes, that those bigger countries, for a variety of reasons, for political reasons, for economic reasons, are going back to engaging in aggression to snatch up territory, resources, and land because the machine has to keep grinding, right? So for the US, Eisenhower warned us the military industrial complex has to produce war somewhere in the world to keep on shoveling money into it. For Russia, for political reasons, to maintain a grip on power, Putin has to have the politics of subterfuge and also distraction, and that's what the war is in part. To stop a civil war in Russia, there was the thing with Navalny, which that was really bad, and then there's this war with Ukraine, which is to divert resources and attention away from the internal political squabbling and to afford Putin more of a stranglehold on power because you gain more powers during war as a leader. We saw the same thing happening with Netanyahu in Israel, that the Gaza conflict went on way longer than it needed to because of political reasons, that there were factions within Israel that were making clear in no uncertain terms that Netanyahu was not going to maintain a hold on power unless he kept the fighting going, and it kept going and going. It bombed and killed. Yeah, we are definitely at a turning point, I think, in history. Like this is, every generation, every era gets their moment. They get their thing that happens, and we all have to go, what's next? Where are we headed? And right now, it looks like we're headed into a lot more war, a lot more fighting. I don't see this particular conflict just stopping.
We'll get the information and we'll talk about it more. On February 25th, there was an NBC nightly news story related to the superintendent of Los Angeles Unified School District being suspended without pay. Reasoning was not given in NBC's report, so I asked Mike to see what he could find out. I'll tell you what, I wasn't really sure. I just saw this story on NBC, and I thought, why did that happen? And I can't figure it out. And so I will be extremely interested if I hear more, but honestly, I don't know what's going on.
So when I saw that story and read about it, I saw a movie recently on HBO with Hugh Jackman and Allison Janney about a superintendent of a school in New York who embezzled money from the school district, embezzled huge amounts of money by creating fake corporations and then diverting money to those corporations for services, in quotes, that the companies were providing to the school district. And one of those companies was one that made like tablets and booklets and technology things for the school, allegedly, when the guy was being interviewed, but it was really funding an apartment in New York City, $800,000 to pay for an apartment. So I wonder if it's something like that, where money and resources were funneled to this company but then in return, the superintendent was getting something from them. Obviously, this is all alleged stuff, but usually when you see a scenario like this where the FBI goes in and actually investigates and detains someone or removes someone from office and they get voted out or put on leave of absence or fired or anything like that where it's very serious, it's because the FBI knows something that we don't. They have access to information because they can look at the money flows. They have investigatory powers that your regular person just has no access to. They can look at bank records and money. There's any number of things they can look at. There's got to be something that they saw that made all the flags go, whoa. All allegedly, of course. It's not clear what it is, but that's what I was thinking of when I saw this story. It's like, why did this company that was paid millions of dollars fire or lay off a bunch of its staff and get into like financial insolvency? Where did the money go? The chatbot apparently was the first of its kind in any school district in the US where it could translate in 100 languages. It did all sorts of things. It was really interesting. I was reading about it. It was very fascinating. But the question is, where did the money go? If they were paid millions of dollars and they were funneled money from the school district to the tune of, I think it was a $6 million contract and they'd been paid half, where did it go? At what level of financial mismanagement and incompetency, if their one product was this chatbot, like how do you lose where did it go? Where did it vanish to? How do you lose millions of dollars? Gone in a cloud of smoke. And so that's the big question I have is, was it all a scam, right? Were they just making a product, but the product didn't actually have an end date where they were going to finish it? That it was just to milk the school district out of a bunch of money and then take the money and run? What was going on there? So the parallel I'm thinking of is actually Theranos. Do you remember the lady who did the blood testing thing, but it didn't really?
I definitely remember Theranos. And then they were just taking the blood to Siemens Machines, the German company, and using it there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And so I wonder if it's something like that, where they were over-promising and under-delivering or something like that, and they couldn't quite like finish the thing. And so they just declared bankruptcy and ran away with the money, right? I don't know. Right. It certainly doesn't look good when the superintendent of a school has this happen to them. It just doesn't look great. But no, that movie with Hugh Jackman and Austin Channing was pretty good, showing how this kind of thing happens. Because it wasn't just the superintendent, it was also the assistant superintendent. And she created a whole like business model where all of her family members ran various businesses that money was being funneled to. And so she lived in a mansion, she had really nice cars, she siphoned millions of dollars over many years. And because she was the one who had the ability to alter the reports, she made it seem like there were fake things that were real, like a pizza oven and a bunch of other. There were all these things put into the official records that weren't real. They were just ghost things, right? Of paying for services and stuff that didn't actually exist. And the reason they got away with it is for so long is it was a huge school district. It was one of the top school districts in the country in a very wealthy suburb of New York. And so their budget was gigantic, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so you can hide a few million here and there if everybody's on the take. Or not everybody. If the ones who are who are supposed to be auditing or providing oversight are the ones skimming off the top. And so that's what I thought when I saw that story, is that they know something. You don't just do something like this without any evidence. They have to know something we, the public, do not know, will not know until it comes out in court. If it comes out in court, they might settle it. A lot of things end in plea deals. If it comes out in court, we will find out whatever it is. It's probably something. But yeah.
Cool. That's good. We'll monitor this story, and if we see more of it, I'll be very interested to investigate. Mondays with Mike.